Gary, we've been talking about the PLACE principle of mentoring, P-L-A-C-E. And so far we've learned that finding your place as a mentor starts with prayer. And that includes praying for your mentee and with your mentee.
Yes, and we've also learned how the L in place, or listening, how critical that is to mentoring.
So let's look at the A in place, which stands for asking good questions.
Girl, it's so good to catch up with you. I feel like it's been forever since we've had a chance to chat.
Oh, I know. It feels so good to talk to somebody.
Hey now, I was hoping I amounted to a little bit more than just somebody.
You are an important somebody. It just seems these days I would talk to anyone who paid attention to me.
Oh, come on now. You're telling me that Brett doesn't pay attention to you? He practically thinks the sun rises and sets on you.
That may be true, but these days he leaves the house before the sun comes up, and he never sees it set. At home anyway.
So he's just not around enough, you mean?
It just seems he's always at work. Just the other day, Sarah said, "Why doesn't Daddy tuck me in anymore?"
Jay, he's just trying to be a good provider. I mean, in this day and age, you should just be glad he has a job.
I know, I am thankful he has a job.
Wait, he has more than just a job. He has a job that provides for you quite well. If only the rest of us could be so lucky.
I know, and I am thankful he works so hard.
Well, but it's he know that you're so grateful that he provides for you so well. I mean, remember in the Bible in 1 Thessalonians, it says that you're to be thankful in all circumstances, for this is the will of God.
I know, and I am thankful that he provides for us so well. It's just that I think he's a workaholic. He's so driven. He's always at work.
Girl, you just don't know how good you've got it. I mean, a woman needs to respect a man who can take initiative and be successful. You've got it made with a man like that. Remember in the Bible how important it is for a man to feel respected by his wife?
Okay, I don't need someone to preach to me right now. I have a great husband, and I love Brett, and I do respect him. I've been to church my whole life, and I've heard a bazillion times about how a wife is supposed to respect her husband.
I'm so sorry, Jay. You're right. What you need right now is a friend and not a preacher. So, look, I'm listening. Just talk to me and help me understand what's really going on.
I don't know. It's just, it seems he's always at work, and we're never together, and I really miss being together.
I'm so sorry. That must feel terrible. I mean, have you guys gotten away from the kids lately? Like maybe taking a date night?
Not very often. He just seems so busy. He always tells me the same story about how it's gonna get better. It's just a critical time in his business. But it always feels like there's gonna be a critical time. And I just feel so alone when he's gone. More lonely than when I was single.
Wow, maybe there's something you can do to help fill the void, like go to a gym or go run.
Jim, one thing I noticed in that video is that Ashley seemed to be almost preaching to Jay instead of trying to understand. In fact, I sensed that Jay was getting a little frustrated.
Yeah, I did too. And really, as a mentor, being able to ask a well-worded question is worth far more to that mentee than me just throwing Bible verses at them. Doug Pollock talks about this in his book, God Space. Listen to what he writes. Questions create an arena for dialogue where people can ponder life and its mysteries together. In most of our conversations, questions are more important than answers. Why? Because in most of our conversations, people aren't ready for the answers we'd like to share with them.
That's interesting. So good questions really prepare the hearts of our mentees. Well, that makes sense why good questions are so important to good mentoring. But what makes a good question different than a bad question? What are the characteristics of a good question?
That's a good question, Gary. I'd say the main rule of thumb is that a good question will foster more conversation, whereas a bad question will actually shut down the conversation. Good questions are often open-ended questions as opposed to closed questions. So asking someone, do you fight a lot with your spouse, is a closed question. It will lead to just a yes or no answer and not much more. But asking, what can you tell me about your conflicts with your spouse, is more of an open question. It will lead to more than a yes or no answer, and hopefully it'll lead to more discovery.
Can you give me another quality of a good question?
Well, good questions really, they just make me feel like I'm part of a conversation and not an interrogation. I mean, no one wants to answer a question only to have their answers turned around and used as ammunition against them.
Kind of like if I ask you the question, are you praying with your spouse?
Yes, right. That one makes me feel bad. I know I need to be doing that as a husband, but I really don't want to answer the question. A better way to ask me that would have been to say, Jim, how can you and your wife begin praying more often together about this? And this is really the big difference for me, Gary. When I'm mentoring someone, I am interested in understanding them. I'm genuinely curious. But if I'm just asking questions in order to draw quick judgments, I'm not really mentoring, I'm meddling.
Jim, I totally agree with you. A conversation feels much different than an interrogation. One thing I've learned is if you have to ask a tough question about a sensitive issue, it's helpful to preface that question with something like, I have to ask you a tough question. I hope that's okay. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. What that's saying to that person is that your trust is important to me.
That's good, Gary. Well, why don't we look at some specific questions? Why don't you read to me some examples of either closed questions or meddlesome feeling questions, and I'll rephrase them into better ones.
Okay. Though the first question that comes to mind isn't necessarily a bad question. Do you go to church with your family?
Right. It's more of a closed question, so it's going to lead to just a yes or no answer and not much more conversation than that. A better way to ask that might be to say, Jim, tell me about your home church. What part is that playing in your family's life right now?
Okay, well, what if I asked, would you please tell me more about your story? What does your home life look like? What do you do for a living? How many children do you have? Are your schedules compatible?
Yeah, I definitely feel interrogated by that. There's just too many questions and I don't know what to answer first. A more inviting approach would have been to say, Jim, I'd like to know a little more about your family life. What does that look like on a daily or a weekly basis? Again, the main rule of thumb is that a good question will foster more dialogue, whereas a bad question will actually shut down the conversation.
Jim, Proverbs 20 verse 5 says, the purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. Let's take a look at how Mary Cassian uses that verse to illustrate the correlation between good questions and good mentoring.
If you're dealing with someone who is just not opening up and who is not bearing their heart and allowing you to have a look into what is really going on, it's important to ask good questions. It's important to ask open-ended questions. And I think the thing that's most important as a mentor is to just ask the Lord for guidance in terms of which questions to ask, and then to listen very, very carefully. And it's very easy to jump in there or to try and try and get the can opener out and try and force the issue and force a person to reveal what is in her heart. But that just normally it doesn't work all that well. And I think that in my experience, if I have a woman that I am mentoring and I'm sensing that there's something going on that isn't quite right or something that she's being guarded about and not sharing, I'll ask her open-ended questions. I would make her aware that I am willing to listen to anything that she has to say. I make her aware that I am very conscious of the grace of God to cover everything and anything that may be an issue for her. So I'm also I try to model openness in terms of talking about issues in my own life, about where the Lord is dealing with me, about sin in my own heart or issues in my own heart. And just to create an environment in which she feels safe and in which she feels that she can trust me in our relationship. And then just sometimes it's just a matter of time and right place, and just spending time together and being in an environment, listening for cues, asking for discernment from the Holy Spirit to pick up on things that she does say, because there normally are little hints, and just to pick up on those little subtle hints that she might give, and just to ask open-ended questions that will draw her out. The book of Proverbs talks about a person of wisdom is able to draw water out of a deep well. So you're drawing out a person's heart like water out of a deep well. It takes time, it takes effort. It takes effort on the part of the person who is listening and on the part of the mentor. People do not just kind of open up spontaneously, generally speaking. It does take a lot of relational time, a lot of patience, and communicating that there's just love and building up trust with that person.